thrilled to introduce my old friend, Carol. I kept calling her Stoutland, because that's how I met her, Carol Stoutland Andersen. I know Carol almost 40 years, but we didn't get really close until we started a Bible study accountability group. I think it was in 2004. And 2003? Somebody said 2003. And it went on until about 2016, I think. Anyway, I will never forget, at one meeting, Carol was sitting on the floor, and everybody was chatting, getting ready with this. They were doing the small talk, getting ready for the meeting. And Carol had a very mystifying look into space. I even remember she was facing the sliders that go outside. When something is very leaves an impression, you remember every single thing about it. And I said, Carol, what's on your mind? And she said, I'm not sure what God is telling me, but I know the Lord is telling me that I'm supposed to be doing something with the women, I think in Bangor, but I don't know what it is. And the rest is history. Sister Carol, come on up. This is my fancy umbrella.
I'm so happy to be here this morning. I have my notes. It really is a privilege to stand before all of you today and share with you what's so deeply personal and profoundly life-changing for me. And I've entitled this today, The Power of Saying Yes to God. And yes, I am Stephanie's old friend. You know, each of us faces moments in our lives where we stand at a crossroads. Moments when a choice is presented and the direction we choose can change everything. Today I'm going to share with you 3 defining moments in my own life when I said yes. They weren't always easy. In fact, one was made in the innocence of childhood, another in the depths of grief, and then another in the face of uncertainty and a lot of fear. But each one had cost. Some tangible, some deeply personal, but each one brought a reward greater than I could have ever imagined. Saying yes to God is an act of faith, even without knowing what's on the other side. But what I've learned is that God's plans are always better, far more unbelievable than I could have asked or imagined, and even more purposeful than anything I could have planned for myself. I'm going to be sharing a couple parallels with you just because I feel that so much of my life has been rooted in the God of the Bible, and I'm going to be just sharing a couple Bible stories with you. And there are so many others that fueled kind of the faith and gave me the fuel to say yes. So today I invite you on this little journey of my life. I'll start when I'm a little. And there are a couple stories, but my hope is that they will inspire you as you have a choice before you and to say yes to what God has in mind. The reward of trusting Him is worth all the cost, I can assure you. But I also want to give you a disclaimer. Some of it is going to sound a little bit like Little House on the Prairie. And while I know some of you laugh because you remember that show, hopefully most of you do in this room. And while I would like to be Laura, I assure you I am much more like Nellie. But please remember that. Please remember that as we're talking. I've named my first yes my foundation of faith. I was raised in a pretty large family. My mom had 4 sisters, and my dad had 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother. But we had a lot to celebrate and do together. There was a lot of tradition. But a lot of my significant memories from childhood unfolded on an 80-acre farm in rural upstate New York in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. In the little town of Sharon Springs, my father moved our family there in 1972 to an old farmhouse that had no indoor plumbing, little electricity, and just heating in a few of the rooms. I have no idea why my mom chose to follow him there. I would not have followed Steve to something like that. I'm telling you. But she did. I'm sure he made her lots of promises to transform it into a beautiful bucolic farm, and we quickly got to work. By November, we did have a flushable toilet. We had running water, but until then, there was a 3-seater outhouse. Raise your hand if you used it. There are 2 people in the room that might have. Me. But we had that, and then there was a rain spout for showering. Life was a whirlwind of adjusting to farm living. My dad bought 2 of every animal, whom we named. And I especially loved Jack and Jill. They were our 2 lambs that I bottle fed every single day. We were not farmers by trade. My parents were both raised in Brooklyn. And there was an elderly retired couple across the street, Kitty and Toby. They became our mentors. With their guidance and lots of trial and error, we raised crops, tended animals, cared for them, worked in the garden, and we embraced farm life. The days were full, lots of chores. It was hard work, but it fostered a sense, I think, of resilience even in my life to this day. I was one of 4 kids. I had 2 older brothers and 1 younger brother, Eric. He was my closest playmate during those early farm years. As the older 2 Ken and John were much more consumed with farm life. And if you know my brother John, that is where he gained his work ethic. He works all the time, and he can do anything really quickly. But both of my brothers dove right into this experience. They made friends with the neighboring farm. Those 2 boys, they were a couple fields over, and they were my brother's mentors. Eric and I were pretty young. We were only 2 and 6 when we moved there. So we didn't do a whole lot of work, but there was so much to be done. My older brothers got help the first few years from my parents, but they eventually took on everything themselves. Faith was very central to my upbringing. My parents, though not perfect, provided a loving home and a solid spiritual foundation. They instead instilled in me a sense of belonging. It was rooted in not only our Norwegian heritage, but a very close extended family, lots of traditions, and a strong church community. We joined a Baptist church the next town over, and I was immersed in, Sundays, Wednesdays, missions conferences, tent revivals, you named it, we were there. But our connection to our family in Brooklyn remained very strong, and we attended summer camp at Pine Brook and then eventually Tuscarora. But my first guess was saying yes to following Jesus, and while I don't know a day that I didn't know God and his love for me, I found in my mom's Bible when I was helping her pack at one of her recent moves, a little card that was written in my handwriting, and it was one of these ones that you check out the box, like I rededicated my life or I gave my life to Jesus, and it said August 5th, 1973, and that I checked the little box that I gave my heart to Jesus, and it was at a tent crusade at that little Baptist church in the next town. From that day on, I really do believe that my relationship with God grew steadily. I was surrounded by the love of my parents, church leaders, mentors, and my faith became just a grounding source of hope in my life. My family spent about 10 years on that farm, and we had lots of adventures and unique experiences. Our across the street neighbors, Kitty and Toby, they watched the shenanigans from a front row seat on their porch. Our animals escaped regularly. Just imagine, there were lots of them. We had litters of barn cats, we had a few dogs. There was always something going on. My parents were always learning something new, so were my brothers, so were us. Heidi knows how to birth lambs. I know how to castrate bull calves, milking goats, the list goes on. I remember one of the biggest surprises was when my brothers went out to the barn one morning for chores, and there was a foal in with one of our horses, Daisy. We had no idea she was pregnant. But at 15, my family's journey took an unexpected turn. We left the farm and we moved to Tuscarora Inn and Conference Center in Pennsylvania, where my parents both got jobs. And it was a very happy move for us. My father became the maintenance man at Tuscarora. My mom worked in the office. And we moved into one of the houses on the camp. It was great, but it did uproot me from a very small rural community. You think this is rural here? I think there was probably 200 kids in our whole school, kindergarten through 12th. So I was going from like a class of 11 in whatever grade I was in to 200, and it was really a shock for me. But at Tuscarora, I was surrounded by some wonderful people, Lynn and John, Herb and Helen, and just all of the other people, the board members that came every weekend. I worked at Tuscarora. I reconnected with my Brooklyn cousins and built so many meaningful friendships with the staff that came on the weekends to work. And I saw God at work in a conference center and really at a ministry setting in all kinds of new ways, influencing me and shaping even more of the person I am today. So this first yes to Jesus wasn't just a moment. I really feel it was the beginning of my lifelong journey of faith. It shaped my beliefs, my identity, and the way I navigate life's challenges to this day. And I'm so grateful for those early years, even especially at Tuscarora, growing up around so many incredible people of faith. And so this yes, I think, laid the foundation to every other yes that I've made in my life. I parallel this experience just slightly, and I'm going to tell you why, but I hope it inspires you to learn more about her. But Hagar, you'll find her story in chapter 16 and later on throughout Genesis. But she found herself at a moment kind of in an unexpected place and gave God a unique name, El Roy. And it was the God who sees her. And as I look back on that season of life, I really do feel that I was seen by God, and that even in this move, at the transition to Tuscarora, just being surrounded by a beautiful, beautiful, loving group of individuals, I feel like God saw and knew that I needed that experience in order to prepare me for my future. I think this narrative mirrors too, where we can be seen by God in our struggles and can be led to new places, not only of safety, but purpose. And I think it beautifully reflects how God does promise to bring his people through trials with compassion, direction, and hope for a future. My second yes, I'm calling a reluctant trust. And this yes was a decision to trust God in a very dark season of my life. When things did not unfold as I had planned or even hoped for. But I'll fast forward from the 1980s to the late 1990s. I spent my teenage years living in Tuscarora. I attended Hillcrest Academy and graduated from there. It's a boarding school in northern Minnesota. Graduated in 1984. I moved home for a couple of years here at Tuscarora, but I moved to Brooklyn to live with my aunt and cousins, sharing a king-size bed with Heidi Foss and her mom. But we lived in a Brooklyn apartment for a couple of years, and that's where I met and married Steve in 1990. We settled into family life in Brooklyn, later moved to Staten Island and had our boys. My siblings and I remained very close, our extended family, very, very close. We were together for Christmas, all kinds of things, holidays, weddings, and other milestones. We're always together. It was very meaningful, lots of tradition and around our heritage as well. But in 1997, the darkest season of my life to date began to unfold. That summer, while visiting my parents, who lived here at Tuscarora, my younger brother, Eric, showed up for a visit as well, kind of unexpected, and I hadn't seen him in quite a few weeks. But his appearance was shocking. He had lost about 30 pounds since the last time I had seen him as an estimate, and his skin just looked horrible. His color was gray. Nothing like the strong young man that I had seen only weeks before, and I recognized those signs. I had seen them, that look. Years earlier, while living in Brooklyn as a newlywed, Steve and I were volunteers with Discipleship, a ministry in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. The organization began by working with gang youth in that neighborhood, but eventually expanded to serve the entire community. And around that time, the AIDS epidemic hit that area really hard, particularly affecting those who were in the drug-using population. The disease spread and affected many in this tight-knit community in Brooklyn. So discipleship shifted gears too, and they began hosting monthly dinners at the church Steve and I attended, and it was specifically geared for families and individuals affected by AIDS. Many attendees were HIV positive. Some of them had, at that time, what I used the term full-blown AIDS is what I think they used then. But it was singles, couples, parents, and their kids. They all came to these gatherings to find a safe place to feel supported. And Steve and I were there. We helped in various ways, whether it was helping with cooking, setting up, or watching the kids so the parents could have a meal in peace. But that season of volunteering gave me a stark familiarity with the physical toll of AIDS. So when I saw Eric, I suspected immediately. I asked him directly if he had been tested for HIV, and he denied it and listed all other ailments, but deep down, I knew. Over the next 2 years, I watched Eric's body and spirit deteriorate. He resisted facing his diagnosis, even as it became painfully clear to everyone else who saw him. The most tragic part for me was that refusal, that he couldn't really even begin to address healing in any way, even prolonging his life. It was already almost 2 decades into the AIDS epidemic in our country, around the world, and there were so many new drugs that were coming out, but it was still a death sentence. So we ultimately knew that was happening. He lost his housing. He would oftentimes sleep at my house on the bottom bunk, sharing a room with our boys and at home on Staten Island, but then he would disappear. We would take him to doctors and clinics, and then he would disappear again. And I think it was a lot because he couldn't face that reality, and for a wide variety of reasons I wouldn't even know because he never even talked about it. But there were countless phone calls between my cousins and I, my siblings. We would track him down, we would update each other and support one another as we were watching him and just trying to support him. Early one morning, following one of those disappearances, I answered the phone to hear my cousin Nancy telling me that she was looking out her back window and he was sleeping on a lawn chair in her yard in Brooklyn. We did countless outrageous things to keep him close with us. My friend Nicole, some of you know her, she took him with her for a week-long business trip in DC. And when he would fall asleep at night, she would call me and give me the daily updates of what they did, going through his stuff, seeing what kind of medications, if any, he was taking and whether he was taking them. We were obsessed with him. I did research. I called any resource I could to offer hope to prolong his life, and it was relentless. I was relentless, but I will tell you that at that time, that journey, I think, was agonizing for me, as I'm sure it was for him. By the spring of 1999, though, his health worsened dramatically. And at that time, Steve and I decided to move from Staten Island to Brooklyn. We bought a house here in Tuscarora Village and wanted to be close to my family. And I held on to hope. I did. I really believed that there was going to be a transformative breakthrough with him and that he would seek treatment. I had it all planned out. People were praying for him, praying with me, for him, but that breakthrough never came. In early 1999, in June, he was admitted to Cabrini Medical Center. And despite his struggles to breathe, he had a hard time even walking. I thought this admission was a turning point, and I thought that he would come home from that. But just days after that admission, he was placed on he was intubated and placed in a medically induced coma and never regained consciousness. In the early evening of July 6, 1999, he passed away at 29 years old. I was devastated. Moving to Pennsylvania without him seemed pointless. I had a great job as an executive in New York City. I had a live-in nanny caring for my boys. Steve and I had wonderful friends and a strong church community in Staten Island. Why had I made this choice? I was mad. I was mad, I was sad, heartbroken, and really, really angry at God for allowing this to happen despite my prayers and the prayers of serve so many others. This reluctant yes, this is what I'm going to describe to you, came amidst this heartbreak where I thought that everything was impossible. I questioned everything. I even looked for ways to reverse our plans. We closed on our house in Pennsylvania in July, but weren't closing on our house in Staten Island until September. And we tried to figure everything out not to make this move, but it happened. I moved to Pennsylvania, and the first few months were marked by an awful lot of tears. I remember I couldn't even go to church without crying. It was just hard. And I know several of you, probably many of you, have experienced loss where you felt the same. My boys started their new schools, and eventually I did leave my job in Manhattan. The daily commute back and forth was too much. And then in early 2001, Steve and I had another child, and his name was Jacob Eric, named in honor of my brother. This season of sorrow softened me and taught me so many things that I didn't anticipate in hindsight. And over the next decade, I spent a lot of time searching for answers from God, like why had things turned out this way when I had prayed so hard for another way. But through that, through a lot of reading, I think I did any Bible study that was offered anywhere, and just trying to find answers to my faith, this faith that was such a strong foundation for me. Why had things turned out the way they did, and what purpose would be on the other side of it for me? But as I look back, I can see now that I learned what it means to love others in their brokenness and how to serve even when the outcome isn't even what I hoped for. Through his illness, I also watched my mom love and care for my brother with unwavering love, even in the face of rejection and judgment from others. It opened my eyes to the power of compassion and the ways that we're called as people who follow God to love others. And I really do believe that it shaped my ability to advocate, honed my patience, and deepened my capacity for empathy. Looking back, I can see how this reluctant yes prepared me for what was to come. It reshaped my understanding of trust in God and taught me to lean into his presence, even when life feels unbearable. The season of sorrow became a foundation for my next yes, and one that would lead me to love and serve others in ways I could have never imagined. I struggled here to pick a parallel story, but I picked Ruth, which the circumstances are so much different, but I'm going to tell you where there's a parallel, and if you don't know her story, I encourage you to find it. Find it and read it. It's in the Old Testament, the book bearing her name. But she had to leave behind the familiar and step into something completely unknown, and said yes to God's call on her life. And while my brother's battle with AIDS was a time of immense grief and life felt overwhelming, even in the midst of that darkness, I sensed a call to trust in God, much like Ruth trusted in Naomi's God. This yes for me wasn't easy. It meant surrendering control and stepping into a path that I really couldn't fully see. But like Ruth, I found that obedience opened the door to a story of redemption, love, and purpose that I couldn't have planned. God guided Ruth to a place of belonging and blessing. And as I look back, I can see that he guided me, turning even the hardest season of my life into an opportunity to grow closer to him and serve others. My yes was definitely more reluctant than Ruth's. She went willingly, but I think the parallel here is this step of faith into the unknown. Ruth suffered a loss. All her future was blown. It was unexpected and devastating, and I could relate to that. But she chose to trust God and move forward, and that's where I relate. I don't share any parallels to what happened next for her, but it taught me that God, again, sees me, knows what's going on, and that he's faithful to provide. My third yes, I'm calling my remarkable yes. And this is where the story gets really good. Never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined what was about to unfold. Over the next decade, I'm going to tell you that. but some of you have seen this story from the beginning, and I hope that those of you that do know it, I hope that it can kind of remind you of just how remarkable it is. Because remember, I'm like Nellie, not Laura. That's the beauty of God's work, though. His plans are always better, sometimes bigger, and always more breathtaking than we could ever design for ourselves. And I'm excited to share this journey with you and some of my coworkers and women that inspire me every day that are in this room. Today, I serve as the leader of Bloom, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing sanctuary, healing, and empowerment for survivors of trafficking and exploitation, of trauma and addiction. Our mission just continues to expand. It blows my mind. Our annual budget this year is just under $1.2 million. We employ 9 full-time and 16 part-time staff. I think that number's right. Close enough, she says, my director of finance back there. We manage 5 residential homes and 2 businesses. Melissa is here today, and so is Laura from those businesses. Through our programs, we can care for 21 women and at least 4 kids while serving countless others through our outreach program. The story of this yes begins years earlier, though, in the wake of my brother's passing. As our youngest, Jake, approached school age, my husband Steve and I became foster parents, serving in that role for 5 years for Northampton County children and youth. And it was during this time that I came face to face with systemic injustices through the lives of the women whose circumstances, some of them left them no choice but to use their bodies to survive. Caring for their babies, I heard their stories of homelessness, some of them trading sex for survival and the trauma that brings, and in hindsight, at least one woman was controlled by a trafficker. Many struggled with substance use disorders, desperate to recover, but caught in that relentless cycle. They all shared one common desire, though. They all wanted to be moms. They all wanted to be good mothers and to be reunited with their kids. But tragically, few succeeded. I was so disturbed by what I saw and even more unsettled by how close these stories were to my own and to my own comfortable life where I was surrounded by love, security, and even abundance. They wanted to do right by their children, but the realization struck me hard that they couldn't. And even under close circumstances, maybe just one wrong choice or a twist of fate, I could have been in their position. And as I learned more about the profound effects of childhood trauma on self-worth and purpose and identity, I began to see these women certainly not as failures, but as survivors, victims of circumstances beyond their control. For me, this wasn't just happening somewhere else. It was intensely personal. I was caring for their babies, standing in as a mother to their most precious possession. And I think this deeper engagement really became the foundation for Bloom. It taught me to walk alongside women in their struggle, trying to understand the complexity of their challenges and working with them, alongside them, to create a path so that they can become the hero in their own story. From our beginnings, we've developed and cultivated this culture of sisterhood where we share power with one another as we each develop our own voice, which I think is really unlike so many other types of programs where there's a lot of top-down bossing people around. So this was really new to me. It was nothing I could have planned, believe you me. But God's work through Bloom has intertwined their healing journeys even with mine. The resilience of the women I work with at Bloom inspires me every day. Their courage to confront their trauma gives me strength to face my own. And I've witnessed God's miraculous intervention over and over and over again. I will tell you, we see miracles, if not every day, every week. And that is crazy. It's great. I have this front row seat to some of the most amazing stories. Bloom became a sanctuary. It truly did. A place where we all came together, not with material wealth or resources, because we had none in the beginning. Someone bought us a house, just told us to get started. We ran by volunteers the first year or two, but we had this shared determination that we wanted to do something different. And Together we formed this community, promising to support one another, and we have. In fact, some of them have just never left. We really are building this community just to stay and support one another, and that has been transformational, not only for me, but I think for others. This transformation into a formal residential program has really been nothing short of miraculous. What started as an assignment during my undergraduate studies that I pursued in my late 30s has grown into something extraordinary. Those earlier years were challenging. I think there were a couple times when I sat in Susie's kitchen crying, wondering if we would ever go on. Others, some of you have paid all my bills when I had several $1,000s, coming up next. And every bill has been paid. Even the other day, Ashley said to me, "There's money in the bank," and payroll just went through. So that's God's goodness. But we've had better things to even celebrate. There's been sober anniversaries, there's been birthdays, holidays that we've celebrated together, baptisms. We have another baptism tomorrow. And so many things have led to other things to celebrate. Weddings, healthy babies born, to moms who are caring for their kids, to families reunited, to dreams pursued and even realized. We've also had, though, our moments of tragedy. Some of you may remember our sister Jasmine, who died in 2019, and her death really shook me. I remember I really struggled with my faith after that season. Again, kind of bringing me back to that season when my brother lost his life, and just saying, why? Why would it turn out this way? But I'm grateful for those years of study that I really, I think, leaned into my faith, just trying to understand and be patient during those silent times when I didn't hear from God. They really helped carry me through. Even the next year, as COVID began, one of our close friends, Jackie, also passed. And then the next year, we lost Kerrigan, who had been with us for several months.